welcome back to KSP 101. This is gonna pick back up where we left off, and today we are heading to Pol, the final location to explore around Jewel. Almost have the transfer window ready. Going to go ahead and finish preparing that. Looks like it's good to go. And now it's time to leave the tracking station, head to the launch pad, and launch this new station core out to Pol from the MUN launch pad. If I'm not mistaken, it's the KSS 3 that we're going to be launching. One of these. Just need to find out which one before we do it. Can head to the tracking station again and just check out the last couple that we've been launching and take it from there. It looks like it's the KSS-3A. KSS-3B around Lathe is a little different. Need to find out what the difference is between the 3A and the 3B, and then we'll be able to start the mission. Once the VAB loads up here in just a moment. Craft. Wait for all of those to load up. Jump on down to the K series. Let's check out the 3 first. This is the one with the return vessel. That's not the one that we're going to launch, so it must be the KSS 2. There's a 3A and a 3B. Let's check out the 3B. Let's see what its deal is. Looks like it has a lot of extra fuel. And the return vessel as well. Alright, so it's got to be the KSS 3A. So let's check that one out. A lot less on the part count. Looks like we have our winner. Before launching it, I'm going to make sure that there are nukes in this thing. If I'm not mistaken, there are in this one. Not in the lander that we've been using. Okay, there are the nukes. Groovy. Everything looks good, seems to check out. Alright, we'll go with that. Let's make sure there are no Kerbals sneaking on board. Looking good. Just gonna go ahead and go to the MUN launch site from here instead of the launch pad. Get this mission going. Before we launch though, we do need to check the location of the MUN and its orbit. Hello. Let's go ahead and do that. Looks like we need to warp it around to the other side of its orbit still. Alright. Gonna go ahead and do that real quick. You can see Jewel off there in the distance with our network line. Looking awfully close. Let's say about there. And then we'll launch from here, make our way to the dark side of the MUN, and that's when we'll do our transfer. Alright, let's launch. And again, as always, waited till I hit about 50 meters per second in velocity, went fully sideways. Now we're just waiting for the apoapsis to hit about 50,000 meters. Thank you. And now that we're above 5,000 meters in altitude, we can go ahead and warp out to that periapsis. I'm going to warp just a little behind it to give the vessel time to reorient to the prograde mark while it's on its way out there, and once it arrives and while it's orienting or reorienting, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out and set Joule as our target. Zoom back in and just wait for it to hit that prograde mark so we can begin circularizing around the Mun really fast. Then we'll time warp on over to the other side of the Mun, on the dark side. We'll do our transfer burn over to Joule and set up our Pol encounter. Go ahead and time warp over just a little closer. Let it reorient to prograde real quick again and burn. Groovy. Alright, so now that we are in a very nice stable orbit, it's time to go to Joule. Need to make sure that our vessel is lined up in its orbit at the edge of its orbit with Joule. Right about the time that anti-target mark hits the retro mark, right about there, we'll cancel the time warp, go back on over to prograde, and we should see the target mark starting to dip into the prograde mark. So a little bit along the... It's close. I'm going to warp ahead just a little bit more though. And once that dot is touching the edge of the prograde mark, I'm going to cancel the time warp, reorient to prograde, and begin the transfer burn. And we will be on our way to the Joule system and to the final moon to explore before heading off to either Dres, Moho, or Elu. Can't wait to find out which one. Alright, now that we are reoriented, let's begin our burn. Let's keep an eye on those first two side stages. Prepare to decouple those here in about 20 seconds or so. About 6 seconds. As soon as we do that, we'll go back to the map view and check out where we're heading. That was awfully close. Still works. Okay. Just a little before Moho, or Dres, sorry. Have about 74 seconds of burn time in this stage. Not bad. Need to keep an eye on that ascending node and the descending node, of course. Hopefully it won't increase or decrease. I mean, if it decreases, I won't complain, but we are pushing out beyond Dres's orbit here in just a few moments. Very rapidly increase out the joules from that point. We have plenty of delta V left to make it to that point, so let's wait for that. And we'll get out of the Mun sphere of influence so we can see where the true ascending and descending nodes are. As that gets closer, it'll be time to slow down on that throttle a bit and bring those two together and get our encounter. And now it's time to go ahead and get out of the Mun sphere of influence so we can get a beat on that. Let's focus on Joule. Zoom in. Nice line. We'll take that. Now, where is our true descending node? Pretty much right behind us if it's holding true to the ascending node being that close to the apoapsis. May want to go ahead and try to do a normalization burn right now. So, while it's doing that, let's get out of that time warp so we can realign, so we can do that burn. I'm doing alright. How are you? Very excited to get the Pol mission going. Alright, now that we are pointing or locked onto the normal mark on the nav ball, let's try to bring that down a little bit. A little more equatorially lined up with Joule there. We can and likely will lose the encounter like that. We'll just have to prograde burn a little more. I can definitely sympathize with that a little bit. I still have to work 5-6 days a week, but it's a bit strenuous. Not being able to stream as much or being able to enjoy free time as much, but it's very boring. Outside of a few crazy customers that we're still getting. My main mission in this episode, I'm going to be streaming at least 2 or 3 episodes today, but in this episode, I'm putting this station core out here into Pol orbit, and the lander design that I've been working with has been great and would totally complete this mission with ease, but I want to design a newer, more streamlined lander by the end of this episode to have prepared for the next episode after this, which I'll be streaming today, to dock up to the station to knock out the rendezvous, docking, and transferring between 2 vessels, and the accomplishments in our contracts and missions, and from there land that lander, plant the flag, do the breaking ground science, etc., etc., and then make it back from there, or make it back from Pol after doing all that, and find out where the contracts are going to be taking us off to, where we will pretty much have the entire Joule system conquered at that point. That's pretty much the goal today, though, to finish up with Pol, find out if we're going to head off to Ilu, Dres, or Moho, or if it's going to ask us to land and return from the surface of Lathe or Eve, even, because we haven't covered that in the series yet. Tylo was very hard. Personally, I've only been able to land and return from Tylo, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 times, but I've only tried a few times. It's very hard to land. It's very easy to make it back from, though. Making it back to orbit, as long as you have like 2800 delta V or more, it's easy to make it back to orbit. Then a few thousand more delta V to be able to make it back. But landing is a beast of its own. Oop, overshot that a little bit. That's okay. We'll go ahead and continue the normal burn. Try to straighten that out a little bit before we make our approach to Joule and Pol. May even be able to score the Pol encounter setting this up right now. It took a few attempts this time around for this series, but it ended up working out. It was very, very close making it back to orbit, though. Definitely didn't take enough fuel. Gonna go ahead and continue with this normalization burn as it wraps around Joule here. Just trying to bring that around to a more equatorial line and insertion. But need to see, yep, we do have our descending node back on our trajectory line. which is good. And it looks like it's right when we escape from Kerbin, which is interesting, and we only have 0.4 to correct, so I'm gonna go ahead and warp to that and then finish that burn. Definitely a good purchase. I hope you've been enjoying it. Did you get the 2 DLC, or do you have it for PC? I'm not gonna claim to be a genius, but I've pretty much done everything that there is to do in the game, at least once. It's very fun. It's very nice to be able to have a simulator that lets you do so many things space related that's more grounded in real life. Did you end up getting the DLC for it? Totally recommend it. Once that is lined up with Joule's orbital line, I'm gonna cut the thrust. That should be pretty much right on. Awfully close. There we go. I'm gonna continue to prograde to bring that line into Pol's line now. Not too bad off on that degree of inclination relative to Pol. It is also at this point that we're going to have to limit the thrust capacity of these engines. Starting with these two, we're going to shut these off. And then we'll reduce the thrust limiter on the primary central engine there by about 90%, bring it down as close to 10 as possible. It's definitely going to be worth getting whenever you do get them. With the Making History expansion, you get tons of new parts, very useful parts and engines, as well as the MUN launchpad, which you have to unlock in career science mode, but it's readily available in Sandbox. And the MUN launchpad is very, very useful for saving money, using less fuel. Just have to get the transferring from a MUN in orbit around a planet, or a moon in orbit around a planet, how to transfer between solar bodies while under the influence of a planet and a moon, and how the moon's orbit relative to the planet and the target destination. Well, you have to learn all that to really be able to utilize it, or you can just hop out of the moon's orbit and hop over to Kerbin's orbit and do it from there, but it's way more efficient to do it from moon orbit. Alright, now let's bring this periapsis down nice and slow. See, even just barely thrusting up now with this limited to like 10% thrust capacity, it's moving in pretty well, pretty quickly. May go ahead and try to burn anti-normal and bring that up to Pol's line just a little bit more. I'm not sure if it'll help or not, but we'll find out. Let's highlight the descending node, and as soon as we are on the anti-normal mark, we'll see if it brings that up. And let's go ahead and throttle. Okay, that brings us down, but our descending node is normalizing, which is interesting. Okay, now it's starting to wrap it around. I'm just gonna continue burning that until it's as close to 0 as it will allow. It's gonna be pretty much right on top of the periapsis, and then we'll start to, yep, okay, it's already starting to go back down. I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you for that, David. That's definitely the goal. trying to cover literally every aspect of the game in this series. Running through the main missions now via contract, like where the World Record Society contracts send you, and then after that visiting all the Easter eggs and sending rovers out to do rover science and working on planes, SSTOs. Gonna take care of all the auxiliary stuff like that after the main tutorial series is complete. So now that we have that set up, I'm going to update the quick save. I'm going to time warp ahead just a little bit manually, make sure it doesn't change the periapsis much, and then I'm going to prepare it to reorient to the normal mark and warp on over to the descending node, just a wee bit behind it here. Definitely thank you for checking them out too, and I hope they help. I'd like to really go in depth and in detail with every little thing, even if I've already covered it in each episode. That way anyone watching can kind of jump around in the series and they'll still get the full explanation for stuff like transferring to the Joule system, how to correct your degree of inclination relative to your target, and docking, various things like that. No matter what episode number it is, I always try to go into full detail about every little thing and try to explain it in the best way possible, or at least that I know how to. Got a bit of a long wait here heading over to Joule. Here lately I've been taking very short breaks during this time period, but not really feeling the need to this time. But it is going to take a few minutes to get there. So along the way, something I do usually, can put the is our target destination. It's a very, very rocky, jagged surface to land on. It can prove to be a little difficult trying to find a flat surface. There's hardly any gravity at all. Very comparable to Eve's moon, Gilly if you've ever been there, or the moon that we visited recently, which I'll, whoops, need to fix that real fast. Go over some of the parameters and characteristics of the moon that we're heading to. See, in its parameters you can see its ASL gravity is only 0.03 G's. That's like 3% of Kerbin's gravity. The Kerbals themselves got it confused with pollen grain. It's very interesting. I suppose that's why they named it Pol, or Pol. Pollen, Pol, not sure. I'm just gonna stick to Pol. Outside of that, there's really not much else to say about the world or the moon. Pol. It's very colorful. The surface, whenever you land on it, it looks very cool. Very colorful. Let's check out those north and southern poles. This one actually seems to be a little more concaved. Be interesting to check that out. What about the northern pole? Ah, there is a feature there, and it looks concave as well. Looks like it's dipping down into the planet up there and down on its southern pole. Normally it kind of raises up in most locations outside of Moho, but like on Duna, there's a very massive glacial mountain range and this very sharp peak at the very northern pole, or northernmost tip. Not sure if I've ever explored the southern pole of Duna, but it's very fun to check out the pole or polar regions at every location. Even Jewel doesn't have a surface feature at its poles, but the gas in the atmosphere, like similar to in real life, there's like a hexagon at the pole of Jupiter. There is a surface feature, well, an atmospheric feature at Jewel like that. There's still enough time. I'm gonna go ahead and put the focus on Jewel and zoom in and check that out real quick. Just zoom in a little bit until I can see its line. There we go. It's very hard to see. I'm gonna disable the user interface. You have to get it in the right light, and with the comm network lines going, it's even more difficult to see. I need to disable those if it'll let me. There we go. Okay. Now let's disable the user interface. Try to find the right lighting. You can kind of see it there, like 6, maybe 8 dots there at the very tip of the northern pole. I've yet to land like right in the direct center of that and then descend down into the atmosphere and see what happens. I've gotten very close, but still want to check that out. Very cool view here from the southern pole. Almost looks like a storm whirling around. But we should be fairly close to entering Jewel's sphere of influence. About 20 seconds away now. Gonna narrow down that warp a little more accurately. I'm gonna go to the vessel view, and you can see Jewel back here as we approach it. I'm gonna go ahead and disable the user interface. Get a nice view of Jewel as we enter its sphere of influence and warp ever closer to it. Starting to see some moons now. And we are here. Now we just have to wait for the vessel to reorient to the normal mark, and then we'll correct that descending node, and then set up the encounter with Pol, and put this thing in orbit, and then head back to the Space Center and to the VAB and start building the new lander. Okay, so it's pretty much reoriented. Let's go back to the map view, exit warp mode, and put the focus back on the vessel by hitting the 2 sticks in. Highlight the descending node, warp a little bit closer to it. Once we get there, we'll correct that, then warp over to the periapsis, lock ourselves onto the retrograde mark, make our orbit, and once we have that, we'll just continue retroburning and set up the encounter for Pol, and prepare to put this thing into Pol's sphere of influence. Alright, let's try to narrow this down a little better. The closer we can get to it, the better. Again, I'm hitting square to cancel that time warp right off instead of using the left and right shoulder buttons. Much better. Whoops. Forgot to turn those engines back on and set the thrust back up all the way. I'm just going to use that central engine. Need to locate the other node. Well, that's gone now too. That's a shame. Gonna have to wing it. Passed that by way too quickly. Let's go ahead and continue burning though, just a wee bit more, until these look like they are lined up. Okay, there, we have a mark. That tells us we're awfully close to having it correct, but we can get the ascending and descending nodes back here in a moment by getting ourselves into dual orbit. Going to reactivate these engines while it's reorienting the vessel to the retrograde mark. Burn through these real quick. Now that we have that ready, let's go ahead and warp on over to this periapsis. Put ourselves just a wee bit behind it there. And I'm going to time warp over until I'm about 20 seconds away from the periapsis. At that point, I will reignite the engines. Just going to keep an eye on that dual escape node, as it's going to move rapidly, I would say, with this much thrust away. Not bad. Not bad at all. Keeping an eye on the G-force, it just went down. It's time to stage. Continue burning. That periapsis might disappear, just like the descending node did, but we'll get it back, just like we will get the descending node back here in just a moment. Let's see, escape velocity is 9,700. Shoosh. Like checking out those little parameter bits. Waiting on this to wrap itself around Jules' loving arms, which will happen more and more rapidly as it goes. And there. Now, where we are, Pol is on the exact opposite side. Let's go ahead and continue to retro burn just a wee bit there. So when we wrap around once, only once, it won't take all day to do that. Let's go ahead and warp over to the ascending node. Once we nail that down, we'll make our encounter. Let's make sure that we are locked onto anti-normal. Put our focus back on our vessel, get a better view. Close enough. Gonna go ahead and warp a little closer. How's our delta V looking though? 50 seconds of burn time, about 1,000 delta V. Not bad. Definitely enough to finish this off without having to dip into the other stages. And fully locked on to anti-normal. I'm gonna warp right on top of that node now. And then hit those thrusters. Oof. Overdid it a little bit there. Really? Okay. Just gonna point back to normal again. Gonna have to do something about the thrust limiter. Some pretty incredible thrust to weight. What is that? 2.24. That explains it. It's not a whole lot, but still quite a bit. I'm going to reduce the thrust limiter back down closer to 10, and then take it from there. And cut. Now it's time to set up this encounter. I think the best way to do this, or that we are going to have to do this, is to warp back over to the periapsis and do a retro burn about the way that we normally have been. prepare to be pointing retro upon arrival, or to reorient to the retrograde mark. Good, that'll be right behind that periapsis upon arrival. It's a bit tricky to get. Missed a good opportunity to have that encounter. Could have done a retro burn at the apoapsis and brought this line in just a wee bit more to have made contact, but would have had a lot more burning to do upon arrival. Coming in at a higher speed like that, I had to come in a little slower. I'm going to let that reorient to the retrograde mark and then time warp over to the periapsis and begin closing the gap there on that approach. Retro is not going to do it, huh? Okay. So, let's try burning radial out then. We'll put the thrust limiter up to about 50%. I'm going to get rid of this extra information now. Can still see the delta V readouts. That's pretty much all we need right now. Now that we are pointing radial out, let's see what happens. Yep. Do that radial out burn real quick. Ooh, okay. That didn't last long. Alright, so let's just go ahead and warp over to the apoapsis. We'll lock on the radial in upon arrival. Well, this is being awfully funky, isn't it? That would require way too much of a burn time. Okay, we'll make one more pass at the periapsis again, see if we can't nail this down a little better. May just have to go ahead and re-extend our orbital line. I know we can get a better approach than this though. I'm gonna warp once more out to the apoapsis. Hopefully we won't have to do this too many more times though. May as well keep warping around back to the periapsis again then. Awfully close. That would be a little too close for comfort. Gonna keep warping around. We could have done a radial in burn and brought those in, but that would have brought us dangerously close to Joule, I think. Now that's a little better. We'll give this a shot. Let's do, I guess we can try radial in. Normally this isn't this difficult. Still requiring a lot of burning. Let's try retro burning, perhaps. May actually need to do prograde just to increase this line out, like I was saying, but we'll see. Surprised it's taking this much. Okay, so we'll go with this retro burn. I don't think this is gonna be the right. I'm not digging it because I really want to do it at the apoapsis. I'm just not quite sure. I can give this a shot, but I'm really not feeling it. So I guess I'll bring the periapsis in closer to Joule and try to narrow this down that way and just take it from there. Tons of delta V to play around with, and won't really need it to refuel the lander necessarily, where it's just Pol. Just go ahead and take the quick approach instead of fooling around anymore. Put the focus on Pol, zoom in, we have pushed beyond the side of pole that we want to be on, so I'm going to point back to prograde, get the engine throttled limiter down to as close to 0 as possible, I would say. About 2.41, I'll take that. Want it to be on the other side of pole, that way we're coming in on the 90-degree side. Alright, very good on that thrust limiter. Push it out to about here, that'll work. And then, may need to do a normal burn. Yeah, kind of want to go ahead and get that out of the way. Let's point normal and try to bring that up, make it more equatorial. Try to line poles, orbital lines up with themselves as best as possible. Let's see. We'll go with that. And then we'll try to... Okay, so we're going to have to point anti-normal. We're going to try to bring that periapsis up in line with the equator of pole. That way we have a nice, stable equatorial orbit once we retro burn at the periapsis, or at least not much of a degree of inclination in the orbit to correct. Alright, let's go ahead and bring that up now. And we'll cut the engine right about there. It's a little better. Let's go ahead and manually time warp ahead just a wee bit. So the SOI for this is 1,042 kilometers, that's about 10,000 meters. And our orbit will be at about 27. In fact, okay, yeah, we can just correct it once we arrive. Manually time warp ahead just a little bit, and then warp close to the periapsis, not right on top of it though. Need time to prepare, 2 minutes, that'll work. Be prepared to point retrograde upon arrival. Let's get rid of this information. And we need to make sure that we have our thrust limiter set back up to full capacity. We have arrived at pole. Let it buff the graphics a little bit. Or is that as good as it's going to get this close? I believe so. Oh, there it goes. It's buffing a little bit. Alright, we're at retrograde now. We are a minute and a half away. Let's go ahead and time warp over to about 30 seconds or so away. We're going to have to burn quite a bit of this orbital velocity off to get into orbit. Let's go ahead and do that. How much delta V is remaining? Plenty. More than enough. So we don't have to worry about staging. We can just keep burning until we have our orbit. As soon as we make orbit though, I'm going to bring that apoapsis down to about 50,000 meters. Warp over to it and increase the periapsis out to about 50,000. And then correct the degree of inclination of the vessel's orbit, and we'll be good to go. And upon arrival, it should be pointing prograde in advance, so we can increase the periapsis out to 50,000 very quickly and easily upon arrival. And then we will correct the degree of inclination by burning normal. Since it's going down on this side, we need to aim it up. Now that we have arrived, let's push that periapsis out to 50,000. I'm putting it out to 50,000 for the sake of time warp ability. So if you're too close, you can't really do a whole lot of time warping, and everything will take forever. It's actually fairly equatorial, to be honest. It's only a few degrees off. I'm just going to go ahead and keep that. And we should have a few hundred delta V remaining. Pretty close, 285. Let's go ahead and open this docking port shield. Have that ready. Let's rotate the vessel to where the panels are north and south. Groovy. Looking good. No loss of comms. That puts our mass relay portion of the station out there with the rest of the ComNet network. Very strong network out here. Looking good. Now we just need to finish the rest of the episode by preparing the new lander for the next episode, which I will stream after a short break after this episode. I'm going to update the main save and then head back to the tracking station first to take out the trash, and then head back to the Space Center and into the VAB to build the lander. Then we can just attach the Joule transfer vessel to that lander, and then alright, now let's get rid of some of this trash. I'm going to disable all these and make it easier. Alright, so now it's just the debris. Let's collect the launch stability enhancers from the mine launch site, get some money back for those, and then get rid of the 4 pieces of debris. Quick and easy, barely an inconvenience. Let's reactivate our markers here and then head back to Space Center. Don't really necessarily have to build a new lander. Could just retrofit the current one. So that knocks out the Pol contract. First flyby, orbit of Pol. Before we head to the VAB, let's head to Mission Control and check out what our current contract is now. Science data and return from a flyby. Oh, we'll do that. We'll do that and more. Let's take that, see if there are any other contracts related to Pol or the current mission. Not really seeing anything else. Alright, so the goal now is to rendezvous, dock up, and transfer between the lander and the station to knock out all of those potential contracts and accomplishments. After which we will land on Pol and deploy some breaking ground science, plant our flag, gather up some surface science, and make our way back home. Let's head into the VAB. I really do want to make this new lander, but I am very curious about what exactly would need to be retrofitted with the current lander that we've been using. So I'm going to open up that lander and I'm going to take a look at it and see what can be done to it to make this a little more of an easy process. It's not the M1. It's not the R series. It is in the J series, but I don't think it's by itself. You can just open the J2C and rip it apart. See what we have to work with. The only real issue with it is power and the part count. So I believe it's in the 400 range. 422. It's a lot. And taking care of the power issue, I'm going to do that immediately. I'm going to add some nukes to this. toss those nukes on the side and radial for those to provide it plenty of power. And I'm very tempted just to go ahead and use this vessel again because it's been so good, especially with the Tylo mission. That was very fun using this vessel. Just put those nukes deep inside the capsule. I think I'm actually just going to go ahead and use it. Adding that little bit of power really solves the only issue outside of the part count being ridiculously high. Can't really complain about the results of this thing. There's nothing wrong with this vessel at all. I'm just going to update that save on the craft now that the power issues have been handled. Well, there is also one more issue with the power, and that is storageability with the power banks. I'm using these very tiny batteries, which is not very ideal. I'm going to get rid of those. I'm going to grab those. Oh, I wasn't using the move tool, so I'm going to have to do it the hard way. Oh, never mind. I can still select the move tool. I'm going to get rid of those batteries, update those real quick. And then the power issue will definitely be taken care of. And you can just keep using this lander. Do the same thing I did with those nukes. I'm going to put it radial 4 here on the side and bring those into the capsule. Groovy. Okay. Now if I check the engineering report, should not be any... Nope, there is nothing concerning about this vessel. Or so they say. It is a very fine vessel. Plenty of power now. Its mobility could be a little better, but I'm not going to complain about it. I do need to check these vectors. Make sure the gimbal is locked on these. Alright, so that's locked. Those are locked. That is all the sets of the vectors. 4x2. Okay, yeah. Those are good. I'm going to update that. And that takes care of that. Not sure what else to do with the remaining 6.5 minutes here. I'm going to return to the Space Center, update the quick save and the main save, and while I'm doing that I'm going to look something up real fast. KSP Easter eggs. I'm pretty sure there's not an Easter egg at Pol. I mean, if anything, there might be some moon arches or something, but I'm going to find out just in case. There's absolutely nothing there, except for a monolith. And it randomly spawns wherever it pleases. Alright then. So, not needing to land anywhere in particular at Pol, which is good, because it's already going to be hard enough to find a flat surface to land on. So, let's update the quick save. And we'll update the main save. We have our mission. In the next episode, we are launching the J2 series craft to dock up at the KSS-3 in orbit around Pol, knocking out the rendezvous, docking and transfer between two vessels in orbit around Pol, as well as the orbital spacewalk, the science high above and near Pol, and the construction of the first station in orbit of Pol. That'll take care of all of the missions in the space around Pol. Then we will land, plant the flag, deploy the breaking ground science modules and control modules and power modules, grab the surface science, hop back in the vessel, and if we have to, we can make orbit and dock back up at the station for fuel. If not, we'll head straight home. And if we don't have to take any fuel from that station, we can then take that station and put it into a polar orbit for more relayability, increasing the apoapsis and the periapsis, making it in orbit at about 150,000 meters in a polar orbit, which will strengthen the relay network even more. And that'll wrap up everything for this episode and the itinerary for the next episode, which I will be back in streaming after a short break here in about 15 minutes. We're going to go land on Pol. Take a look at that colorful surface. That very dangerous, rocky, jagged, colorful, beautiful surface. But, until next time, thank you for watching. Hope it's been helpful. Hope you've been enjoying the journey so far. And I will see you all again shortly. Goodbye.